What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and we are back to a solid ratio of Ford versus GMs here at the shop. I know you guys were nervous there for a little bit, but we're finally back offset onto the Ford side. So we still have the VMP car. We're still waiting for the Cometic head gaskets. So this thing is still exploded on this side of the shop. I mean, you guys can see how much work it is to do head gaskets on one of these things. I mean, everything's kind of laid, it looks like a mess, but it's really laid out nicely, so it'll go back together easily. And then the parts, we checked the deck on both the heads and the block, and they're perfectly square. It did have 100 series head studs in it. Now we're going to a 200 series head stud, which gives you an extra 15 pounds of torquing capacity. Hopefully that fixes it. We're also going to have to check the tune-up, make sure it's not lifting the head due to detonation. There's no signs of that, but that is what typically causes it. Anyway, everything else is here, ready to go back together on that. But we have a new Cobra entering the arena. And this is a 16,000 mile DSG car from California. It was just recently purchased here, hence the temp plate. And Dan has already been cranking this morning to get the IRS out of it. I know this is going to come as a shocker, but we're going to put a full FTBR kit on this. First time, kind of nervous. So we're going to be putting, obviously, everything that we typically do to them. The only thing that this one's not going to get is new cross-axis joints, and that's simply because these ones are low mile. They're pretty expensive. These ones feel good, so we're probably not going to replace those ones. But we have the cover coming, or the cover's here. All the bushings are here. So we're going to start blasting this apart, cleaning it, and putting it back together. And then we are also doing a 26 spline input shaft conversion like you guys saw in the last video. We're doing another one. It's a pretty similar setup, RXT clutch, 26 spline input shaft, new bearings, and getting it all back together. Dan's struggling with the exhaust.
No. Yeah.
Dan's struggling because of the exhaust. We're going to try to take it out without taking the X pipe off. We don't want to see how lucky we can get, or unlucky we'll be, trying to get it off. Now, you want to subscribe for this build. First of all, DSG is an awesome color. This thing is sick, and it's like mint. It's got a little dent on the fender on the other side, not a big deal. But the reason why we're doing the transmission and the IRS right now is because we want to have the clutch broken in before the tune, and before the tuning starts happening, because this is going to get a full 4 Innovations fuel system with twin 255s. Then it's got, he's got injectors and rails, a 3/4 standard inlet Whipple that's going to be going on it, idlers, the whole gambit. So it's going to be really sick, and it's pretty much stock now. It's got like a Diablo Sport tuner and Diablo Sport pulley, otherwise, and a Bassani exhaust. Otherwise it's like factory. And now he's got the wide wheels to match. So that's what's going on with that one. And then while Dan's working on that, I have a 1969 Cougar 351. And I gotta get this up on the stand to completely disassemble it, and we're gonna be doing a mild rebuild on this. So you guys will be watching that as well. I think I'm going to use a dial bore scope, make sure the cylinders are round. If they are round, we'll probably just dingle ball hone it and re-ring it. Nothing crazy. The budget's super low on it. We don't want to go crazy. We do want to get a set of Chinese aluminum heads. He's got a Victor Edelbrock, or he's got an Edelbrock RPM2 intake manifold to go on it. And then the only thing that we're going to try to get him to splurge on is a roller cam conversion. It's worth its weight in gold, not only for cam profile, but also starting it up. You don't need to worry about breaking in the camshaft. You just let her rip. So that's what's going to be going on with this one. And maybe manifolds. We'll see what he wants to do there. So I'm going to get this on the engine stand now. It's ready to come off the little stand and start disassembling it. So, crazy day. This will be the next couple days that you guys will see on the video. All right, guys, I just want to show you what we had to do to get this intake off. I don't know if it's ever been off. It split the gaskets. But we had to pull it up with the engine stand and hit it with the pry bar before it would come off. And Dan had to stand on the engine stand. She was on there good.
Well, we had that little fiasco going. I got all the bell housing and all that off. Trans is out, obviously clutch is out. Oh, and the battery's gonna die. But I guess quick note. For the top starter bolt on Cobras, if it'll focus, this was the setup that's able to get up in there. We're able to kind of like shimmy this up in here behind the starter and between the motor mount and kind of get it up and feel your way around to get to the top one. So you don't need, like you see online where people are like, oh, you need a million extensions just to get it up through the front. This is all you needed. I mean, you need like obviously a shallow 13 and then a flexible ended ratchet just so you can get it up in there. And then what is that, like a 4-inch and a 3-inch maybe? And I got her done. So that was what I've been able to do it for the past 2 Cobras that we had, or past few actually. Was able to just, we were actually able to just like shimmy it up like I was saying before, get up in there, and there she is. For the other bolt, I just swapped out to a standard length or deep socket on the front and added this to it as well, and able to get that second bolt through the front of the motor without having to deal with that. And then obviously the bottom one's the easiest one, so I left that one for last, so there's no tension on the top 2 bolts that are a little more difficult to get at, because that'll add just more pain and stress to trying to get those bolts out. So all out, didn't have to fight with anything else, able to get it all out with leaving the cat or X-pipe on. These little flanges, these cats are a little bigger than some of the other high flow cats, like a Cook setup or an ARH or this aftermarket setup there. These Bassani ones are a little bit bigger. So it made getting the trans, we had to rotate the trans a little bit to get the little piece past this shielding, and then she fell right out. So moving along nice and swiftly.
This thing is factory AF. This is more factory than the Fairlane motor we did that one time. Or Galaxy motor. Yeah. So I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that we get a set of aluminum heads approved, roller rockers, roller camshaft conversion, tie bar lifters. I mean, you're probably gonna spend $2,000 on that, but not only are you gonna get vast performance increase out of it, but definitely reliability, wear, not have to run zinc oils. I mean, you really get a lot all the way around. But I'm gonna take a break here. I gotta still get all the front accessories off of it so we can get the heads off. But I'm gonna stop here for now. I'm gonna run and grab my tea, come back, and then we'll worry about taking the rest of it apart so we can keep inspecting. This thing burned a lot of oil, so we're just assuming it's pretty worn out. It does turn over pretty easily. It doesn't have a ton of compression. I'm kind of hoping that it needs a set of pistons, because then we could bore it 30 over and bump the compression up along with all those other modifications. Then this thing will be a pretty budget, sweet setup. But we'll see. We'll see what happens with this. Alright guys, so we got the 351 pretty much all torn apart. The rotating assembly is the only thing that's in here. Everything is just beat. The cam bearings are bad. They're chipped. The laminate's chipped off of them. The timing chain had more slop than I could even explain. And I mean, it was like totally sealed together. I mean, this thing's obviously been together a long time. So we got everything off of it, heads are off of it, intakes off of it, oil pan, oil pump, all that stuff's gone. So all that stuff's gonna pretty much be replaced. We're gonna put like a Melling oil pump in it, ARP drive shaft, you know, our typical upgrades that we would do on something like this. We're gonna bring it to the machine shop next door. They're gonna let us know if it needs to be bored or if it could just be honed up with a set of rings. That'll be the deciding factor if it gets a set of pistons or not. And yeah, otherwise she's out. The camshaft I just showed you guys on the bench is weak, so we will be putting a camshaft in it and bearings. Yeah, the cam bearings need to be replaced for sure. They're chipped away there. So I'm gonna pull the oil filter off. That's the last thing before I could really flip it over and start pulling the rotating assembly out of it and get the block next door to be cleaned and machined. Well, got the whole IRS torn down and ready for reassembly tomorrow. All the bushings are removed from the cradle. The lower control arms, I still have to do the upper control arms. Just gotta cut those off and slide them out. And that should be good. Obviously all that's out. We have not put the new clutch back in it because we are missing some hardware from the clutch that we were supplied. So we're gonna have to figure out that tomorrow. Got the diff all sealed up, new cover on there, everything's torqued down, looks pretty good. So we'll get that thrown up in there tomorrow as well. Nicholas is working on a 26-point input shaft swap, and then she will be ready to go. Be done. We want to get all the RTV stuff done for the night so we can dry overnight and be ready to go and hopefully be all back in the car tomorrow.
and ready for pickup. Bushings are all in the freezer, getting ready for tomorrow too, so. Yes, sir.
Should be good.
Yeah.
Nice, you can pick up tomorrow.
Right. Little 10 spline getting swapped out for a 26 right there in the bag. Last line item we have to do, I think, right? That's the last thing we're doing. For this build, for this round, I guess you could say. So, it's going fairly smooth. Can't complain too much. Haven't had anything, you know, fingers crossed. But, so, bring back with you tomorrow with reinstallation of everything else. We got the trans up in the car. Got the RST clutch on, obviously. Got hardware for it. 26-1 input shaft is done. RTV is dry, ready to be filled. Trans crossbar is nice and tight. Everything good. We just gotta put the clutch on there, make sure starter's in, obviously. IRS is complete. Minus, obviously, springs gotta go in when it goes up. Needs to be greased as well. So we're gonna run to the store. We gotta get grease. We ran out from the last one. Get some grease, grease everything up. Everything's torqued for the cradle wise. We just gotta torque down spindle stuff. And then she also needs fluid as well. Diff needs fluid, so we'll need diff fluid, trans fluid, grease, and should be going up in the car here shortly. So far it's been going fairly well. Can't complain. I know I say that a lot, but everything's going rather smoothly. So we will be right back at you.
Anyway, so the DSG car is done. We put a 26 spline input shaft in, a McLeod RST clutch. We did a full tilt boogie racing rear suspension in the thing. The only thing that we did not put in the rear end is the toe links, and that's because they're out of stock. So and cross axis joints because low miles. So the toe links are out of stock. We're going to be getting those on here next time the car's back, because this car is coming back to us for a 3.4 Whipple 4 Innovations fuel system after he gets the clutch broken in. So we did the clutch and the rear suspension now so he can drive it, get some miles on the clutch, make sure it's broken in. Which leads me to my next thing here. And it leads to an interesting topic about these clutches, because the New York car, we put the same clutch in it. And the owner of that car called me when I told him that that's the clutch I want to put in, and he said, hey, you know, I'm seeing a lot of guys that are destroying these clutches on less power than I want to make, and I want to know, you know, what the deal is. And we haven't really ran into that problem ever. I mean, we've probably put a dozen of these clutches, and these cars are similar. The red car that we're racing has an RST in it that's freaking, now it's got to be like 6 or 7 years old. That thing's still taking abuse like a champ. And as soon as that one's bad, I'm going to put another one in it. I mean, I have no complaints about the RSTs at all. Then we finally found something that might contribute to the issue of people running through these. Now, this is a case-by-case basis. Might not be, this is more of a general statement, but we put the clutch in this car. He did not supply us. This project's a little bit different than most, because we typically like to supply the parts that we think the car needs. In this case, he already had all the parts and he just wants us to install what he's got. So he did not supply a clutch, cable, and quadrant kit, which we put on pretty much any car. It's a kind of a basic thing that goes along with the whole clutch upgrade. So when we finished putting everything in, put the car on the ground, or in the air, we could not get the cable on the clutch fork. I'm like, okay, no big deal. Dan realized that you probably got to pull up on the pedal, let it reset its adjustment, and that should give us some. So we hooked up the cable, we kind of forced it on so it would have preload against the pedal, popped the pedal up, which released the adjuster, and it got better, but wasn't perfect. In fact, it probably still would have worked. And I have a feeling that some of you guys, or the people who are having these clutch failures, have that same problem. Then they let it ride, because it obviously works, it works just fine. But it's not 100% engaged when it's when you're thinking it is, and end up blowing through it, especially on break-in when they're not really worn in. Even the red VMP car that we have here, the clutch is not broken in all the way. And I know it's already been on the dyno a handful of times, it's already gotten its ass kicked a few times, but you could see on the clutch material that it has points that have not made contact with the pressure plate and the flywheel yet, meaning that it has not been properly broken in, or it does not have enough miles on it. So anyway, that was a long rant, but that was something we found on this. Luckily, we keep clutch cables and quadrants from Maximum Motorsports in stock because it is so common. So we threw that on there, fixed the problem. Now she's ready to rock and roll. Unfortunately, it's snowing right now. Hopefully it dries up because this thing's ready to go and go get some miles put on it. But continuing with the theme of rear end work, we have a frequent flyer back in the shop. Got David Garcia's S197 nitrous coyote stick shift car. And it is here for rear end work. Last time you guys saw it here, we did the billet oil pump gears, billet timing chain gear, put all that back together. Now it's here for rear suspension stuff. Actually, not suspension stuff, he did all that. But it is here for 35 spline axles with C-clip eliminators, a 35 spline Strange Spool. We'll show you guys all the parts that we're putting in it here shortly. And I think that's it.
Everything, right? Yeah.
All Strange. And then we're probably going to, he has a clutch for it, but we might end up dropping the trans and doing the clutch and some exhaust modifications for him also. But we got to get that approved by him. So we'll see what happens there. So that's what's going to be wrapping up this video. We'll show you guys the products that we're going to put in it, thanks to Strange again. And then we will show you the finished product. Not going to be a whole lot of testing. The main thing that's going to be happening with this thing is the C-clip eliminators is a huge upgrade. And a spool, obviously, from the stock track lock. I mean,
He was gonna do that.
he was going to put C-clip eliminators.
No. He's gonna leave, he just put upgrade the axles, I thought. He did axles in the car. He was gonna upgrade the axles.
Oh, and those axles aren't C-clip
And
eliminators?
put a rebuild, no. And put a rebuild.
Oh, right. So in true Streetcar Shenanigans fashion, we took the reins on David again, unfortunately. Sorry, David. But he told us that he wanted us to take the whole rear end apart, put a carbon fiber rebuild kit in the posi, and put just some Moser 31 spline axles in it. But I was like, hey man, I mean, you're getting to the point where you're at the limit of this rear end setup. We see them start to break around here, especially with the heavier S197 chassis and the stick shift. You should probably consider upgrading. And it's a track only car, it does not get driven on the street. So, you know, spool makes sense and they're cheap. So 35 spline axles that I had in stock, and the spool is what we decided to go with instead. And C-clip eliminators are way safer, so you should have them anyway. But we will give you guys an update. We'll show you what we're putting in it, and here shortly. All right, guys, so in a race application, spools are the most common, and it's to get 100% traction on both tires. Did that flange? Oh, that's a nut. The flange didn't come right off like that, did it?
No.
Okay.
I didn't knock it out yet. We have new ones of these.
Yeah. But another good reason why is weight. So I weighed the stock T-lock with the gear on it. Not that that matters, but without a gear on it, it was 19.19 pounds. So 19.25 pounds. The spool with bearings and races, just as the Ford Racing T-lock is with bearings and races. This weighed 19.9, I want to say, or I'm sorry, 9.8 pounds. So it was about 10 pounds savings by switching to a spool. 10 pounds of rotational weight. So it makes a pretty big difference there. Now the axles, unfortunately, in this case, going to a 35 spline axle, probably make up the difference. But still pretty good. So when we take the axles off and the brake brackets, we'll weigh those versus the Strange 35 spline with aluminum brake brackets. We'll see if there's any weight savings there as well. And then we'll give you a direct comparison, obviously. Alright guys, it's been a while since we updated you on the S197 project. We have some interesting information. So switching to the spool with the 35 spline axles, getting rid of the brake brackets that were on here that were cast iron, now using aluminum ones. The weight of the spool versus the posi itself. And I think that's about it, right? That we took off. Oh, and then having to cut like an inch off the axle in order to make C-clip eliminators work. You gotta cut the end of this off. We figured out that you lose about 15 pounds total. So you gain like 6 pounds by going to the 35 spline axles, but you will lose like 10 with the spool and then miscellaneous other bracketry and components that are no longer going to be staying on the axle. So as of right now, we have everything mocked up. The spool is in it. The gear is perfect. The preload on all the bearings is good. We put a Strange crush sleeve delete on the pinion, and all that's set up and done. Now Dan is finishing up the cover where we got to preload the bearing caps and then put some RTV and lock nuts on that. And then I'm getting ready to seal up the axle ends here, and this is where everything kind of changes. This kind of converts this to work like a 9-inch, where the axle retention is handled by a press-on bearing that's bolted to the end flange like a 9 inches. So these typically leak. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a bead of silicone around the inside here. Then this will go on there to hold the brakes. And then we'll put a bead of silicone on that ring also, so the net will seal to that. ABS sensor goes in the stock location, and the brake caliper will still go in the stock location. So it's a pretty nice little nifty setup they got going on here. Once again, guys at Strange, this is where these are made. Can I help you?
Yes, you had one.
And yeah, that's it. It's going to lock down the 35 spline axles and the spool for this thing. And then we got to let the RTV dry overnight. We'll come in the morning, fill it with fluid, and away she goes. Interesting thing that we found is that this is like, I don't know whose anti-roll bar this is, but
Looks like it looks like the rest of it. Maybe BMR, is that what all this stuff is?
yeah, I don't know if there's some kind of mounting issue with this, but that, I mean, that should not do that. You cannot even move that thing. So that'll be something that he'll need to be addressed. Maybe it needs to be loosened up and retightened or something silly. But either way, everything else is ready to go back together. We're on the upswing on this thing. I'm pretty interested to drive it. So I don't think I've really driven a spool car. I've driven like a locker car, but spool car not so much. Maybe like a welded diff a long time ago. If you have any questions about the parts used in this video or how to set this up in your own car, we do get a lot of messages and emails, text messages, messages on Facebook about setting up cars like how we set them up. Feel free to keep doing that. Obviously, we encourage it, and if you need to purchase any parts, we'd be happy to get them for you as well. But we're gonna get back to it, and we'll give you guys an update in the morning.
Tires got pretty good. Look at